Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Katie Darr. I chair the U.S. Biosphere Network's Communications Committee. I also coordinate the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere Network. Thank you for joining us today for another edition of the U.S. Biosphere Network's Biosphere Bites series. This is a dedicated space for regular exchange and learning across our national and international networks, as that is such a strength of our status as a biosphere region and being part of that world network of biosphere reserves. These bi-weekly 30-minute talks cover a broad range of topics, but all highlight the important work being done to make progress towards sustainable development goals in biosphere regions. As a reminder, these talks are recorded and will be made available to view later on USBN's YouTube page, which I will link in the chat in a minute. Usual Zoom housekeeping, please keep yourself on mute if you're not the presenter or asking a question during the Q&A. There will be time for questions at the end. After the presentation, feel free to put questions in the chat as they arise, and we can make sure we get to those ones first. If you're tuning in today from a biosphere region, I would welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat and what biosphere region you're tuning in from. If you're not tuning in from a biosphere region, still feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Xenabeth Lázaro, who will be speaking to us today about her research to understand the behavior and ecology of sub-Antarctic bats in Cabo de Hornos Biosphere Reserve in Chile. She is pursuing her master's in ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Helsinki as a member of the Bat Lab Finland. She also holds a Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Ecology and Conservation Psychology with a specialization in animal behavior from the University of Florida. And Xena is a recipient of the 2024 Man in the Biosphere Young Scientist Award, which is very exciting. So looking forward to hearing all about your research. Take it away.
Hey, thank you, Katie, for that introduction. Making sure, can everyone hear me? Okay. All right.
Yes, yes.
Perfect. So, think about
We were hearing you pretty clearly, but now you're cutting in and out a little bit.
Okay, how about now?
Much better.
Okay, we'll just stay like this. Hopefully there's no more audio issues. So my computer does that. Okay, so yes, as I was saying, I'm going to talk about the bats at the end of the world. And if you don't know where this is or what I am talking about, well, just stay tuned and listen. Okay. So first, I'm going to talk about a little bit of background about bats if you don't know a lot about them. So just to give you an idea of bats. So there are more than about 1,400 species of bats in the world, and they are located in every continent except Antarctica, although they come really close to the Antarctica. But most of them are located in tropical regions. So what you can see in this map is that the number of species that exist in a region decreases towards the poles, so as you go to higher latitudes. And this is a general pattern in biodiversity due to the decrease in temperature, sunlight exposure, and availability of resources, which makes living in these places very energetically demanding. So there are a few species that are adapted to cope with the difficult conditions in extreme latitudes, and this usually makes the species that live there uniquely adapted to their environment, but it also makes them more susceptible to environmental changes, such as disease, climate change, or human development. So in 2022, there was a review paper that was published that looked at how many studies had been conducted on bats in relation to climate change at a global scale. And as you can see, there are more bat research has been done in the northern hemisphere than the southern hemisphere. And that's by the lighter colors. And there is also very little research that has been done in the high latitudes of the southern hemisphere. So you can see that by the darker colors. And because higher latitudes are more vulnerable to environmental changes, it is especially important to study bats in these regions. And this is actually what I am studying, where I'm studying bats. So what region am I talking about specifically, you may be asking? Next. I'm talking about the sub-Antarctic ecosystem of Patagonia in southern Chile. This ecosystem is not the most kind. It is known for its very strong winds and suddenly changing weather conditions. In fact, you can have all 4 seasons in the same day within a span of just a couple of hours. So here is a short video that demonstrates how strong the winds can really get. Hopefully you can hear it. So you'll need your volume for this, but try not to blow out your ears. And keep in mind, this is a nice day. So let's see if it works. Did that work? Was it horrible sound? Okay. Well, anyway, so that's just an example of how strong the winds can get. And this area is also, it's also cold all year round, with the average temperature in summer being about 10 degrees Celsius, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and short summer nights of about only 4 hours. So if we think of bats, which are nocturnal animals, living in this ecosystem, it's not a very easy place to live. Nonetheless, this is home to the southernmost bats in the world. So of 14 species that exist in Chile, there are only 2 that live in the southern tip of South America. These are the southern big-eared brown bat, Histiotus magellanicus, which is on the left, and the Chilean Myotis, Myotis chiloensis, which is on the right. Not a lot of research has actually been done on these species, and prior to this, no research had been conducted at all in the southern extreme of the ranges. Currently, we know that they depend on forests to live and they eat insects, but basic information about their life history and ecology is still lacking. We're also unaware of any threats to them. Notably, according to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, so we know it as IUCN, the conservation status of both of these species is least concern at the global level. But at the national level within Chile, the southern big-eared brown bat, for example, is actually considered as data deficient. So this might be your face right now. You might be thinking like, what? That doesn't make sense. So the reason for this is that the conservation statuses have been evaluated using the little amount of research that is actually available, which could be giving an unrealistic picture of their current state. For example, there are invasive species present in the ranges, which we know are heavily impacting the landscape and other native species. And then, of course, there's the impacts of climate change, increasing temperatures. So it is important for there to be a focus on studying these species to better understand them and make better assessments. Okay. So now I want to narrow down even more to one specific area where bats have been little explored. This is the Cape Horn National Park, also known as the Cape Horn Archipelago or Cabo de Hornos, it's synonymous. And it is shown here in yellow on this map. And it is located within the Cape Horn or Cabo de Hornos Biosphere Reserve. This place is special because it is where the last forests and wetlands exist before the Antarctic Peninsula. And there's also no existing landmass at the same latitude on the planet. It also is only accessible by personal boat, which makes getting there quite difficult. This place was of particular interest to me because of the unique conditions and remoteness, but also because there is only one existing record of bats there. It was a paper published in 1950 by a PhD student, Claes Christian Olrog, who recorded all of the fauna he encountered during an expedition to these southern islands. However, his observations of bats is quite vague. He mentions that he saw them flying and identified 2 species based on their different sizes, and he used a book called Mammals of Chile. that at the time had information about bats in Tierra del Fuego and the mainland of Chile, which is more north and has different environmental conditions. The important thing to note, though, is that you can't identify bats to species just by seeing them fly. So this left me questioning the validity of his observations and really motivated me to go see for myself. So we embarked on a 1-week expedition taking a similar route, not the same route, but a similar route to Olrogs. And our goal was to confirm the species present on the archipelago islands that today is a national park. So I say we because I cannot take complete credit for this work. This project was done in collaboration with Conserve, and on site, there was a great team of people that made this experience possible. Without them, I couldn't have done it at all, and it just wouldn't have been as fun either. So here we have my partner Javier and my friends Igor, who's the captain of the boutique sailboat that's in the picture, Adriana, Tania, and Cesar. So if you guys are listening, I appreciate you guys very much. Okay, so historically, research like this was done by observing the night sky and shooting at the bats to collect and identify the specimen and then take them to a museum. Nowadays, we have technology and other less invasive techniques to sample and identify species. One of these is called bioacoustics, which is a passive monitoring method used to study animals through sounds. So bats emit calls that bounce back to them and gives them information about their surroundings. So sort of like a radar. This is called echolocation, and they use this to navigate and to forage. But these calls are at frequencies that are too high for us humans to hear. So we've created these devices called a bat detector or a recorder, which is able to record those calls at a frequency that we can hear. And so that we can later also visualize them. So this is what this looks like on the right. And through bioacoustics, we can see the presence of a species, but we can also see some behaviors like feeding or social calls. So what we did was every day we would arrive at a new location, we would disembark the sailboat and hike out to set up the acoustic detectors, which then recorded from sunset to sunrise. And then the following day, we collected the recorders and identified the calls on the computer. We did this in 3 different islands, Wollaston, Hermite, and Herschel Islands, for a week. And then another method we used to monitor the presence of bat species was to capture individuals. So I'm going to play this video while I speak, but feel free to just smile at these cute bats. So sometimes identifying species purely based on their calls can be challenging. So a good way to confirm the species is by capturing them. Here we used a technique called mist netting, where we set up nets in potential flight paths of bats to catch them. Once we caught them, we identified the species, we took some body measurements and also some biological samples. And then after this, we released them back to the forest where we captured them. And due to the weather conditions of the area, we only had one night that was favorable enough for capturing, but we were grateful that we had any good nights at all, to be honest. So there I'm measuring its body length. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so what bat species did we find inhabit the Cape Horn National Park? Dun, 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 dun. So combining the bioacoustics data and the captures, we only found one of the 2 species previously described by Olrog for the area. And this was the southern big-eared brown bat, Histiotus magellanicus. We recorded it on all 3 islands, and we captured 5 individuals that one night. So let's revisit what we know about the 2 species. It is interesting that we did not find Chilean Myotis at all in the area because the species often shares the same habitats with the southern big-eared brown bat. So looking at these 2 maps, we can see that their ranges overlap for a large portion of the south of Chile. The closest place to the national park where we know that the two species cohabitate is Navarino Island, which is about 45 kilometers north of the Cape Horn Islands. So we can assume that the conditions of the Cape Horn Islands are quite different from those of Navarino Island, and therefore not suitable for Myotis. However, we can't conclude what the specific limiting factors are because that was out of the scope of this project. But we do have some theories as to why Myotis is not present. So Myotis chilensis has a high energy cost and a low flight speed because of its small size. And the theory is that this limits its ability to fly a long distance over water to the islands, as well as tolerate the harsh environmental conditions there. And from the pictures you can see, kind of see the difference in size, although they're at different angles, but you can still see that there are different sizes between the species. The second is that the habitat composition, so the tree species and the sizes of the trees, is not a suitable refuge or foraging grounds for Myotis. The presence of Histiotus magellanicus is also interesting because the habitat composition of these islands does not quite align with the preferred habitat types that researchers have observed in more northern parts of its range, which is typically composed of much larger trees with cavities. And this is true for both species. So here we see on the left a forest in Navarino Island, excuse me, which is dominated by the tree species Lenga, Notophagus pumilio. The trees can get really, really tall with a big diameter. And this is what we know as typical habitat for both of the bat species. By contrast, we have on the right a forest in Wollaston Island in the archipelago, which is dominated by Coihue, Notophagus betuloides. And you can see in comparison from me standing there actually in the picture that the trees are much smaller in height and they're skinnier as well. In the islands, Lenga is still present, but we observed very small quantities and often we saw them as dwarf trees. And this is an image of a dwarf tree next to a cell phone, just so to show you how small the trees here can get because of the harsh environmental conditions. So there's definitely no bats in that tree. So from this study, we can conclude that Myotis chiloensis distribution stops in Navarino Island. Histiotus magellanicus is the only bat species present on Cape Horn National Park. And the habitat preferences of both species need to be further investigated to better understand their ecology and ability to adapt to the conditions at the southern limit of their distributions. So to better understand the ecology of bats in the region, I will continue this research for my master's degree with Bat Lab Finland at the University of Helsinki. And the next step is to study them in the nearest location to our previous study site, where we know that both species are present together. As already mentioned, this is Navarino Island. It is also within the Cape Horn Biosphere Reserve, and here is a map to indicate its location. But before continuing, I would like to mention that this project would not be possible without the help of an award I received from the Man of the Biosphere program, MAB, from UNESCO. The award is called the MAB Young Scientist Award, and it is for individuals less than 35 years old. It funds research in natural sciences, primarily within biosphere reserves, and it grants up to $5,000 US, and the next call opens in 2025. So if you want to look more into that, make sure to go to their website to check out more of the requirements. So back to my master's project. In the study, I aim to answer the following questions. One is, what is the activity of bats along an altitudinal gradient? And the other one is, how do meteorological conditions, light availability, insect abundance, and habitat influence their behavior? So mountains are a good system for ecological studies because they have large environmental variations. And in Navarino Island, it has a special topography where the mountains go from sea level to about 1,000 meters very quickly, and it has very marked habitat changes, creating what we call altitudinal belts of habitats, as seen in this figure. So what I plan to do is to put acoustic detectors at each of these altitudinal belts to cover all of the habitats of the subantarctic ecosystem. And I will collect data on meteorological conditions, so rain, temperature, wind. Also on light exposure, I'll collect insects and information on the habitat composition. So by using the magic of bioacoustics, I can see how these different variables are influencing when and where bats are active. This will give me insights about the ecology of bats in the subantarctic and how they deal with the unique conditions there, as well as what habitats they prefer, which might also help us understand the results of our previous study and contribute to their conservation as well. So an important aspect of my project that I want to talk about, and possibly the most impactful, will be to engage with the local community. In the northern coast of Navarino Island, you can find the southernmost town of the world called Puerto Williams. The population is about 2,000 people, and they are the biggest community within the Cape Horn Biosphere Reserve. An important part of this community is the indigenous group, the Yagan people, which were the first to be there and are still there today. And I was fortunate to live there for 2 years. And from my conversations with locals, I learned that not a lot of people know that there are bats in this region. This is with the exception of the indigenous community, of course, which has knowledge of bats, and they have been cohabiting with them throughout history. So my hope is to bring bats closer to people through science communication and community engagement. I have some ideas of how I would like to do this, but I have a disclaimer. These, as of now, nothing is concrete. These are just proposed ideas that I hope to fulfill upon my return to the region. And the goal is to organize community activities alongside locals that are specifically focused on bats. So first, I plan to partner with the local environmental education group that works with children to host an interactive night bat walk, showing kids bat calls in real time and explaining how bats communicate and navigate. My hope with this is to foster an early interest in bats and wildlife conservation. Then I plan to give a lecture about subantarctic bats in the local university to ecotourism students. The idea is for them to take in this information and incorporate it into their local ecotourism activities to kind of serve as bat ambassadors. And I will also offer them a chance to participate in the research process if they wish to be more involved as well. And finally, I plan to collaborate with the cultural committee to organize a Bat Awareness Day. The idea is to create a space where local knowledge, art, and science can come together to inspire positive perceptions about bats through storytelling. And through all of this, my overall goal is to promote bat conservation within the Cape Horn Biosphere Reserve by empowering local communities to continue these efforts and encourage a society that is in harmony with the biosphere. So I don't have a lot of time, I feel, but this is just the last part I would like to mention. I think that I have already expressed the importance of this research throughout my presentation, but I would like to briefly mention that being within a biosphere reserve, it should be in line with some of the sustainable development goals of the UNESCO. And for this project, that would be goal number 15, which you can read right there. So we already know that this research is filling some important ecological research gaps, but something important to mention is that there is a common need between bats and local people in Navarino, which is the use of trees for their livelihoods. And trees are important refuges for bats, but they are also important to locals because it is the main source of heating due to the cold climate. So small-scale logging by locals is common and regulated by the National Forest Corporation of Chile. So the goal here is that important, for me at least, is for to identify important bat habitats so that bats can be considered when granting these logging permits, and a balance can be established between local livelihoods and bat habitat protection. And then finally, the final target is that the information produced from this research can be used to take proactive conservation measures instead of reactive ones, which is very typical in wildlife research, and that it can help guide decision makers as well. So this is just the beginning of getting to know these species, and I hope that this work will push for more studies on bats in these vulnerable high latitude regions. Sorry for going a little over time, but thanks to all my past collaborators, funders, and current collaborators as well. You are seen and appreciated. So I will take some questions now.
Thank you so much for that awesome presentation. And I think for some slides there were some syncing delays, so we'll include a PDF of the slideshow in the link for the recording description also. I learned a lot and I hope others did as well. So I'll open it up for questions. Feel free to come off mute and ask or raise your hand, whatever works for you all. John.
Hi, Xenabeth, thank you so much. Thank you for spending a little time with the USBN and with our team, and a lot of folks actually watch these afterwards asynchronously. So you'll hit a nice big audience within our Biosphere community. So thank you for that. I'm curious about, and congratulations on your award and your work. It's just so fantastic. You're such a great researcher and person to get to know. So thanks for that. I'm curious, two things. One is, I got tons of questions, but does this work lend itself to local and citizen engagement in the use of some of the technologies when you're not there or a researcher's not there? And secondarily, could you couple the use of some sensors with sort of citizen engagement to put out sensors, to listen to sensors, with materials to say, could this program that you're developing port somewhere else without actually having to have somebody sort of have a researcher in each of the different biospheres? What's the applicability and the reach of this over the longer term?
Hello. Can you hear me? Because I had to change my my source of. Okay, cool.
Yes.
I apologize. I didn't really get the first question because I had some audio issues. Could you maybe repeat that?
Just think about the applicability of this, of what you're developing, and how we could think about extending it to other biospheres without having to have a researcher. Both the use of technology on citizen science, whether it's listening or sonar, whatever that is, and then ultimately what would the materials look like to help another biosphere build a BAT program?
Yes, I think it's absolutely possible to do it without having a researcher there. Now the technology has gotten so good that there are these very small detectors that you just plug into your phone, and you just have to download an app, and then you open the app and it connects it, and you just start listening. And so what you can see on your phone is the calls, the visual calls that I showed earlier, and you can see that real. And there's also so this is specifically with Wildlife Acoustics. It's a brand or a company that makes these detectors, and the program also has the ability to identify the species automatically. Now it depends on what region you are, because some regions don't have these databases where they can automatically identify species, because there hasn't been a lot of research done. But for other places, it does work. So I think it's very possible to do this. In fact, one of the things I want to do is to leave behind this detector for the educational group, environmental educational group, so that they can keep doing these bat walks with kids without me or anyone else needing to be there. And then for this region specifically, there's no reference calls to help with the identification. So I would leave behind also a guide for them to be able to identify the calls. And I think that's something that can also be done in other places as well.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have another question. Go ahead.
Two questions, actually also a comment. I'm sorry I missed your poster at the recent EBRS. But do you have any idea where they roost and what they eat?
So
Your audio is cutting in and out a little bit again. I'm sorry.
Cut off video there.
Okay, how about now?
We can hear you.
Keep switching back and forth. Okay. We think we know where they're roosting based on what people have seen in other like more northern parts of their range. But I personally haven't been able to find any roosts yet. I also haven't had the resources to do like a done study to like put trackers on them or something like that to find roosts. But we assume that they roost in trees, within cavities or under the bark. But now the thing is with the Cape Horn archipelago islands, the trees that we observed were really small and really skinny, and there weren't any like obvious cavities. And also the vegetation is like higher up on the tree, and then the rest is just the bare stick. So now it's like a question like, well, are they just cavity roosters, or are they also tree foliage roosters? Like they just hang from trees, or are they using something else, like maybe rocks or crevices in rocks? So the answer is like, yeah, maybe we know a little bit, but not quite. And then what they're eating, there hasn't been a diet study done in the area. The closest one that has been done was in Argentina, in the Chubut province, which is like a couple latitudes north as well. So what we know about them, they're just assumptions. Yeah.
So in the Arctic, extreme northern latitudes, we've been finding the bats mostly in buildings. Are there buildings in the national park?
Buildings.
Buildings.
No. There is one, and that's in the Cape Horn, in Horn Island, which we didn't go to because it's like it's the island that sticks the furthest south from the archipelago. And at the time we thought there were no forests there actually, so we're like, oh, let's not go there. But Javier actually did an expedition there afterwards and found that there are forests, so it could be a cool place to go. But there is one house there because they have a military, a Navy kind of base there. Like there's a Navy person and a family that lives there, and they kind of look over the area and welcome tourists that come like on cruise ships and stuff to see the island. But that's about it. Everything else is just nature.
Look to spiders. Spiders are a major portion of the bat's diet in Arctic climates.
Brainers, is that what you said?
Spiders.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
So we are past 12:30, but I want to give Morgan a chance to ask her question. If anyone else has to leave, feel free to hop off, but Morgan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much. And great presentation, Xena. Loved learning more about it. My main question was just about the threats to these species. So I know you said that there's not much known quite yet, but from what you've seen on the ground, do you think the major threats are mainly from misunderstanding by the community or climate change, both, or something else?
Wow, such a good question. I think it could be all of the above, because so climate change is an obvious one. I mean, now it's still snowing. It's supposed to be spring now, and they've had like 3 snowstorms already, or snowing bouts. And so the winter is getting long, the summers are getting warmer. Who knows like what it could be, how it could be affecting them, but probably definitely their reproductive cycles and preparation for winter as well, and things like that. So that definitely has to be one, because there are very evident things or changes occurring. They seem to have a lot of habitat around because Puerto Williams is such a small town, and the logging and stuff that goes on doesn't go very far from the town, and like 90% of the island is all nature. So I wouldn't think that's like such a huge thing. But there are invasive species on the island, and I don't know, they haven't gotten to the archipelago islands of the Cape Horn, but in Navarino, they're there, and they're the North American beaver and the American mink and the muskrat. And we know, so beavers alter habitats very heavily, and it's something natural that they do in their native ranges. It's needed, but in these places that they're not native, they're changing the landscape and actually creating more habitat for the other invasive species. American minks are heavily impacting the native bird populations, and the beavers knock down trees all the time. So definitely there's some changes occurring there that we don't know if they're affecting bats, but it would definitely be really interesting to study that even, and to see like what is going on, like what's the dynamic there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and congratulations on everything.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Xena, for a great presentation and inspiring all of us with your great bat storytelling. I'm excited to continue to follow this work, and this seems like a really fruitful grounds for research. So excited to see what you do with this. And thanks everyone for joining us for this installment of Biosphere Bites. We hope to see you on future calls. Thanks.
Thank you.